This is Jason Romano, host of the Sports Spectrum podcast, and you're listening to Success is a Choice with Jamy Bechler.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And what an honor we have today to have Shemy Schembechler on the show. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he is the son of the legendary Michigan football coach, Bo Schembechler. And as many of you know, I'm a huge Michigan fan and even have a Bo bobblehead on my bookcase in my office. But our guest is not here today just because he is the son of someone famous. Shemy Schembechler has carved his own niche in the world of athletics. He is the president of the GES Advisory Company. Shemy is also a longtime NFL scout. He has spent his whole life around the best of the best when it comes to coaches and players. Shemy knows what it takes to get to the mountaintop, and so I look forward to our conversation today. Shemy, welcome to the show.
Jamy, I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on the air today, and I'm looking forward to this very interesting interview.
Thank you. You know, the show is called Success is a Choice, and we want to have people from different walks of life that can maybe shed information and insights on success, but success isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not a paint-by-numbers type thing, so definitely want to have you on and listen to some of your stories and some of your insights. So let's get right into it. You know, talk about growing up as Bo Schembechler's son and what that meant to you and how that kind of shaped your life.
Well, first of all, Jamy, you have to consider that what a wonderful blessing that was. The fact that I was born in the fall of 1969, which was my father's first season at Michigan. And when you're that young, Jamy, there's so many things that you do not quite understand about your father's role in the formation of a football program, albeit a very successful one, is you learn through the years about how special it was to play for Bo. And now at the age of 48, it's always a great pleasure for me to be able to hear from my dad's former players, many of which I have very close relationships with. There's guys that I would go to the wall for, and a lot of these guys are some of my closest friends. And for them to share with me on a consistent basis how special it was for them to play at Michigan, to play for Bo Schembechler. And in many ways, the lessons that they learned in their 4 or 5 years playing for him in many ways prepared them for success in life. So the idea at this show is all about success as a choice. You know, Bo put them in position so that they could make excellent choices once they left the confines of the Michigan program. And so it's very special for me to be able to tell these stories and to be able to resemble what my dad's spirit and what his philosophy was, so that we can transcend even young people today, so they can search for what really the true life of meaning is for them and what success means for them.
When we had our son, we adopted our son a few years ago, Jalen, and I was a basketball coach at the time. And when we adopted him, the birth mother was supposed to give birth at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had a game that night at 6 o'clock. And so being a very naive, ignorant dad, I thought that, you know, we just have a kid and we get back to the game and I can coach it, you know, because every mom out there is just shaking her head right now. But that's how I thought it was. And, you know, about 1 o'clock, the baby still hadn't been born. But I missed that game that day, and my assistant had to coach that. You had an interesting story when you were born about your dad and the day you were born, and you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, so it's very interesting because there was a great fullback by the name of Garvey Craw, who was an All-American fullback that played on that team. And he actually, his girlfriend at the time gave birth to their daughter on the same day that my mom gave birth to me. And we were born on a Wednesday, and it was mid-morning. I think I was born right about 10:30 a.m. And my dad came to the delivery room, and he was there through all that. And then in the immediate aftermath, they take you into that hospital ward where you have all the other babies laid out. And he's sitting there with his starting fullback at the same time. And you can imagine how much grief my dad was giving Garvey Cry, a guy who was maybe 20 or 21 years old having his first child. And he turns over to Garvey. He says, "You make sure you keep that girl away from my son." and so that's how Bo carried himself. And so to kind of fast forward through the rest of that day, it came to be about afternoon, and it's time for practice, and all the guys are out there practicing. And so my mom is still in recovery back at U of M Hospital. And my dad didn't quite understand. And so in many ways, you guys are kind of kindred spirits, Jamy, because once my dad saw the birth of me getting born, he thought that day was all over in terms of his responsibility as a new father. And so it took guys like Jerry Hanlon and guys around the staff to make him understand, because Jerry had already been a father before Bo. And they basically told Bo, "I'm going to handle practice today. You need to get back to the hospital and go visit with your wife and your son," and basically forced him out of practice. Now, that was the first and last time that ever happened in the history of Bo Schembechler and Michigan football. But it kind of tells you where his mind thought was, and the fact that you're in the middle of the season, they're getting ready to play a very strong Missouri team that week. And in many ways, you lose sight of where your responsibilities are, especially when you're Bo Schembechler trying to get ready for a game and in the midst of your college football season.
And you said that was the first and it was the last because they lost to Missouri that week. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes. If memory serves me right, I have to go back and look at the records again. It's been quite some time since I've done that.
Well, if they did lose, that would explain why that was the last time he missed practice.
You're probably right, yeah. And I don't think he missed practice because I was the last child born. So I think he learned his lesson. Don't become a father again.
Now, you grew up with a famous dad, and we have a lot of people listening to this that are type A personalities or very successful parents or very successful in their business or whatever they're doing. What advice would you have for them in terms of parenting from your perspective of growing up with a type A successful person as your dad?
Well, it's interesting. My father was really brilliant, and so in many ways he was a type A personality, but he had a wonderful breadth about him in terms of how he would handle different social situations. And I can tell you this unequivocally, it is much different, Jamy, being a coach as opposed to being a father. All right, your father is there to protect you and to guide you and to allow you to find whatever you want to do in life, whatever you want to endeavor to do in life, and just pave the way for those opportunities to come about. And so I can give some very good examples about how Bo dealt with me, which in many ways might have been a little bit different than what running a major college football program where your job is to go out and win games and graduate all your students and sell out the Michigan Stadium every single weekend. So one of the things that Bo did with me was, he never said that you had to go play football, that you had to go this, you had to do that. But if there's one thing that was very clear to me, even from a very young age, he said, if you're going to go out and try and do something, regardless of what it is, you have to put in 100% effort all the time, and you have to be committed to your cause. So say, for example, if I went out for the basketball team, so I did play basketball throughout my childhood, he says you got to play hard, you have to play great defense, and you have to be there for your teammates. So that was one example. And then, like I said, he never made me play football. I had to make the decision that I wanted to go play football. And once I made that decision, my dad says, okay, this is what you must do if you're going to go play football. And so I ended up having to commit to work out with the Michigan football team and Michigan's former strength coach, the great Mike Gittleson. And so I had to do everything the players did because my dad put me in situations where you could make your own decisions, but if you're gonna decide to go play football, you had to be responsible for your own success. Okay, so that to me is an important lesson you have to learn as a parent. Let the young person make their decisions about what they want to do, and then you drive that kid to be motivated to do the very best they can, whether it's school, sports, academics. It makes no difference. And I got another story that actually really lends itself to that philosophy. Is after I graduated from Miami University and my mother had just passed away, I came back and served on the coaching staff for both Coach Gary Moeller and Lloyd Carr at Michigan. And it came time for me to start moving off and moving into my own career. And this is right before I broke into the NFL. You know, my dad obviously had a lot of contacts in and around the National Football League to provide opportunities for me, but he was really uncomfortable in making a lot of those calls. He made me do all the research and the contacts and the networking, the letter writing, and all those things. And the funny thing was, one of my dad's former players was a guy by the name of Jerry Angelo, who at the time was the director of player personnel and GM for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And one thing led to another, and I ended up securing an interview to go down there and interview for one of their pro scouting jobs, and ended up not getting it. And I came back and I told my dad, and he immediately got on the phone with Jerry Angelo, and it was kind of funny. He got Jerry on the phone and knew that Jerry had turned me down for the job and hired somebody else, and he proverbially ripped him a brand new one for not hiring me. And then he hangs up the phone, he looks at me, he starts smiling, and he goes, "I think that turned out better than what I'd hoped," because he didn't want his own opinion, his own name to secure a job for me. He wanted me to get it on my own. So he was actually more happy when I broke in with the Kansas City Chiefs because I did all the legwork on my own as opposed to him making a call. And I think that's a great lesson for anybody who's a parent that wants to support their child, but at the same time wants them to forge their own future as well. Does that make sense, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. Great words of advice there.
Yeah.
I mean, you grew up, it doesn't get much better than Ohio State, Michigan, that rivalry. And you have it.
I would say, Jamie, it doesn't get any better.
I like it. Absolutely. And you have a unique perspective because your father hailed from Ohio. He coached with Woody Hayes. He coached at Ohio State. And you live in Columbus now. So
yes, sir.
Shed some light on that rivalry, what it meant to you growing up, and just the different dynamics of it.
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned that, Jamie, because when you're a young kid and you see all of the excitement, all the anticipation of getting ready for the Ohio State game, and so understand I was still a very young kid. So by the time you get to 76 and 77, you start to develop a pretty good awareness of what that 10-year war was all about. And I remember people coming to our house. So when the Ohio State game was in Ann Arbor, we would have these unbelievable tailgate parties. And I remember somebody bringing a makeshift undersized casket with a doll of Woody Hayes in it with pins stuck in it. And so that to me was my recollection of what this game was all about. And now my dad kind of played all that stuff off. He really didn't get involved with this and that and all those types of things. And it took me several years to really understand the gravity of what the game and what it was all about, and how much my father revered Woody Hayes, because in many ways Woody was as responsible for the beginning of my father's coaching career than anybody. He gave him his first shot in coaching as a GA at Ohio State, and then he served as an assistant for him at Ohio State before he got the head coaching job at Miami. But I can tell you the one story that I remember so vividly, and it's one of my favorite stories about Woody Hayes, and just the amount of respect that my dad had for him, and how Woody basically always treated him like a GA, which is what he should have done. And if you remember years back, so this is early 80s, 80, 81, they had just gotten done taping. It was a documentary that where Bo and Woody both talked about every game that they coached against each other in the 10-year war. It was called the 10-year war. And so Bo actually pleaded for Woody to come up and visit us at the house. He says, "Woody, you haven't been to the house in forever." And so Woody agreed and decided to come up. And I remember so vividly at the time, it was a beautiful spring afternoon. And he had a driver at the time because he was still suffering from diabetes, so he couldn't drive everywhere like he wanted to. But I remember Woody getting out of the car right in our front yard and meeting my father right in the front yard. And he looks him right in the eye, Jamie, and he shakes his hand, and he looks him right in the eye, and he says, "Bo, I want you to understand, I didn't come here to see you." He lets go of his hand, walks right by my dad, walks up to my mother on the front patio of the porch, and he goes, "Mrs. Schembechler, thank you so much for having me to your house here today." And little Shemy's sitting back here wondering, nobody has ever talked to my dad this way, and how endearing he was to my mother. Well, he literally melted my heart that day. And so from the age of 11 or 12, however old I was, I have been infatuated and in love with the great Woody Hayes and everything that he stands for. And so it's a great lesson for me living here in Columbus, Ohio, and having that deep respect for the great Woody Hayes. I think in many ways that's what allows me to live in peace in this town.
Well, you're still involved. You're still involved. You have a webcast called the Rivalry. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And so I was approached, and so it's interesting. I was approached by a company that wanted me. I had done some on-the-air stuff with this network, and it was actually Earl Bruce's production company for many years. And so after Coach Bruce had his stroke a couple years back, I basically volunteered my time to help out in any way I could because I wanted to do it to support Coach Bruce. And so what came out of that is the opportunity to host a show that basically we're going to keep it going, actually, but it started in this past September. And it's turned out to be a lot of fun and a great success. I tie it in with my company and what we do, and we're very fortunate because I can get a hold of many of the Ohio State faithful and many of the Michigan faithful to come on the show. And so we've had some wonderful guests on the show, like Jack Harbaugh and John Jansen and one of my dad's former captains, John R. Besnick, as well as many wonderful Ohio State players like Tom Levanek and Nick Miller. And so it's been a lot of fun. So the whole show, we basically celebrate the rivalry. And so I got to tell you, it's been a lot of fun. So we actually host it every Friday night. We're going to continue it this Friday as well. And so we do have a nice little following that follows our show, and they like hearing from the old retired NFL scout and Michigan guy. And so we're getting a pretty good response from the general public, and they tend to like the show pretty good.
We'll get back to our conversation with Shemy Schembechler in just a moment, but I wanted to let you know that you can get a free audiobook download of Bo Schembechler's book, Bo's Lasting Lessons, by going to audibletrial.com/Success is a Choice podcast. Bo Schembechler won nearly 79% of his games while as the head coach at the University of Michigan, and he's a member of the College Football Hall of Fame. You can go to the website audibletrial.com/Success is a Choice podcast to download his book for free. This is one of the best books I've read, and the hardcover version sits prominently at eye level on my bookshelf. It was co-authored by John U. Bacon, who is one of the top writers out there. And now let's return to our interview with Shemy Schembechler. You mentioned your company, GES Advisory Company, and the motto is forging dreams, building teams, one player at a time. Why did you start this company, and how are you adding value to student athletes through it?
Yeah, and so it's been a very exciting model that's been built up, and so we're right around 2 years old right now. And when I left the NFL, I wanted to spend some more time at home. The life of an NFL scout is rather daunting. You're on the road 9 months out of the year. So when I decided to leave the NFL, I ended up looking at a model in the recruiting space to say, what can I do? What do my skill sets lend itself to that we can really help young people and their families navigate the recruiting process? So the concept that I came up with, I said, I'm a really good evaluator of talent, okay? I did it for 16 years in the National Football League and projecting talent for NFL rosters. There's no reason why I can't do it at the high school space for kids who want to play in college. So what we have done, we have crafted a model that used the NFL evaluation model to evaluate high school game film and to evaluate players and to write reports on their skill and ability, and projecting that to the collegiate level, whether it's Power 5 conference, Division I, all the way down to Division II and Division III, as well as NAIA. And so the model has worked out very well. And what you do is you basically, once you understand what a player is, where his talent level is, and then having a clear understanding of what that young man wants to study academically, we do our very best efforts to match the talent they have on the football field as well as what they're doing academically to find the best school that's a fit for them. It may be a Division I school. It could be a Division III school. And one of the things that's been very exciting from our standpoint is to find the best fit for those kids, where they get a chance to go out and play and start and contribute to the success of their team. And in just 2 years' time, Jamie, we've developed this program. We've actually expanded to 19 states now. We have over 110 prospects within our system. And I believe that once we branch out and we bring other pedigreed NFL scouts into the fold, I'm confident that we can bring this model to all 50 states and represent players throughout the country.
What are some pitfalls or things that you've seen that sidetrack athletes or even coaches when it comes to reaching their potential?
You know, I think one of the things, and this is one of the things that my dad taught me at a very early on. And you actually, if you read his book, the John Bacon book, Bo's Lasting Lessons, the first chapter is listen before you lead. Okay, I think you have to have a clear understanding of where, and this is kind of what GES does, is understanding where your skill set is, all right, where you can play at, and then the key is how do you accept constructive criticism in coaching so that you can improve. One of the great things that my dad always did is that my dad, very loyal to his players, all right, always wanted to look out for his players' best interest, and that's number one. Number two is that once you understand where a player is and what he can and can't do, it is your job to develop that player, to coach him up, to make him understand this is what you have to do if you're going to get to such and such a level from a playing standpoint. And so it's coaching them through whatever issues as well as whatever talents that they have to make sure that those young people are motivated to succeed, because that in many ways is going to pave the way for whatever success they have in the college game. But even more so important, so they can craft a competitiveness about them so that they can take those skill sets and apply them to what they do when they graduate towards a career. And so to me, that's the key, is really being motivated to succeed, understanding what you do well, what you don't do well, what you need to do to improve upon all those things, and getting the proper coaching so that you can realize the dreams that you want to achieve, even beyond playing college football. Make sense, Jamie?
Absolutely. You know, and you grew up around some of the best athletes, some of the best coaches, and then even in your NFL days, you've seen some of the best athletes and best coaches. What are some of the common traits or qualities that have made people successful?
You know, I just think they're committed to being successful, and they're tireless workers because they have a true passion for what they do. And I think if you have great passion for what you do, odds are you're going to become good at doing it. I mean, this is exactly why I formed GES, because I sat down with my wife. I said, what is the thing that you enjoy doing the most? Well, I enjoy breaking down football game film. Okay. And that's exactly what this model is being built around, is my ability to evaluate film and to identify talent. And I think if you understand what your true passion is and derive the skill sets that you have to be successful, that to me is the pedigree to becoming good at whatever you aspire to do. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
As you look back on your time, are there some athletes or coaches that kind of embodied this? Certainly you've been around a lot of them.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, and I think there's several models that I've always appreciated, and there's guys that have gone on to great success in coaching. I think Jim Harbaugh is a guy worth mentioning, a guy that played for my dad, and then there's a plethora of guys that had great careers in the NFL. I like to think about guys like Stephon Humphreys, who was a two-time academic All-American, played guard at Michigan for Bo in the 70s and 80s, went off to play for the Chicago Bears for many years, was was a great offensive lineman for the Bears, and because he was a brilliant student, went back and earned his medical degree, and now he serves as a neurosurgeon out in the Bay Area. And so there's people like that take their skill sets and apply them and find a true niche that they can build a life around. The other thing that I love to use as an example is just look at the last 3 Michigan athletic directors. If you look at Dave Brandon and Jim Hackett, and most notably now Ward Manuel, those are the last 3 Michigan athletic directors. What do they all have in common? They all played for Bo. And for people to utilize what they learned from Bo playing football for them and understanding what they can do to set up their next career. And I love the guys that became successful in things outside of football based on what they learned playing at Michigan football. And some of these things are so basic and simple, Jamie. It's the whole idea of how to be early to a game, how to prepare, how to lead others, how to be unselfish and have a team concept with what you do. And I think in many ways, if you can apply those concepts to your career, this is what builds leaders, and this is what puts people in leadership positions. Make sense?
Absolutely. Are there books or podcasts that you like to read or listen to?
Yeah, there's certain books. Obviously, I'm preferential to all my father's books that he wrote down through the years. There's one that I was talking about just the other day that I think really is an unbelievable book if you're a coach, whatever level that you're coaching at, high school, college, or pro. That Woody, my dad actually helped him write this book, and this book was produced way back in 1971, and it was Woody Hayes' book, Hotline to Victory. And the book is a brilliantly written book that basically educates people on how to develop within the coaching industry. There are chapters in there that cover football. They cover how to handle a meeting, how to organize and put together a football program. There's one particular chapter that I've always adored, and that is for a coach on how to prepare to go through an interview when you're interviewing for a job. And I think that art has kind of been lost amongst many. Now, I think there's some people that are really good at preparing people for interviews. But for Woody Hayes to think about things like that all the way back in 1969 and 1970 and to put them into a book, I can't tell you how many different coaches have approached me down through the years that remark upon that particular chapter and how it helped them secure a job when they interview for a coaching job. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I'm going to, we'll put those, all those Bo books, and we'll put the Woody Hayes book in our show notes so people can check that out. But yeah, I have not read that Woody Hayes book, so I will be checking that out as well. It's
unbelievable. Jamie, that book was so good because I am a junior student at Miami University, all right? Now, we get to take some classes that are fun. So one of the classes I took was football class, which was taught by former Miami and Northwestern coach Randy Walker. And ironically enough, 25 years after the book was published, we use Hotline to Victory as our textbook for football class. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, well, some books are timeless,
exactly.
And there might be a few things that change, but
right.
But some of the principles and core tenets, don't have to necessarily change with time. As a basketball coach, John Wooden wrote a book years and years ago, Modern Basketball, which isn't so modern anymore,
I know, yeah.
But it's still, a lot of those core principles are the same, and it's still one of the best books a basketball coach can get.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, sir.
Who would be someone you'd like to meet or spend time with if you could that you don't already know?
Oh, very good question. That's a good one. I had the great opportunity to meet President Ford when I was a young kid. I think, given the opportunity, I would love to have met Paul Brown, the great founder of the Cleveland Browns organization, one of the greatest coaches of all time. He passed away before I was old enough to really realize it. But I always have a great affinity for football coaches that were the founding members of our great game. So people like Paul Brown and maybe Amos Alonzo Stagg and people like that were at the beginning of the foundation of what our great game is all about today. So people like that, in all honesty. Now, maybe it's a little short-sighted. I should probably come up with a politician or somebody like that. But the fact that I met President Ford, I think that's good enough for me.
Was he president when you met him?
He had just left the presidency. He had come through Ann Arbor. He loved coming to Michigan football practices. I remember my mother and one of my mom's best friends actually designed and constructed a celebration of the 100th year of Michigan football in 1979. And I think he was the president at the time, in all honesty, that he actually took the tour and let my mom take him around. And that was a memory I won't soon forget. I can promise you that.
And for those listeners that don't know, Gerald Ford was president, and he was also an All-American at the University of Michigan.
All-American center at that, Jamie. He was a great player.
Yeah. So he became one of my favorite presidents of all time just because he was a Michigan guy.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect.
Okay, think back during the course of your life. What purchase of $100 or less has had the most impact on your life?
$100 or less.
Well, I mean, it would probably be your first date with your wife. That had the biggest impact, probably, unless you spent more than $100.
I probably spent more than $100 that day. But I will say this. Okay, here you go. You ready?
Yeah.
It was the day that we met, all right? And so I'm down here in Columbus on Labor Day weekend of 2000, and I was with one of my good friends who actually lives here in town, and we went down to a bar in German Village here in Columbus, not thinking I was going to run into my future wife there. And I can tell you we purchased enough beverages that was certainly under $100 leading up to when I met her. So does that count?
Absolutely.
Good. So maybe a couple adult beverages, no more, no less. We talked a lot of football for the 2 hours leading up to when she walked through the door and basically brightened up my day and my subsequent life. So that to me was probably the greatest investment, the greatest money that I spent that turned out very well.
Well done. Good investment. Well, where can people connect with you or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so people can find me. I'm all over social media, so people can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and all those great things. People that have an interest in our program at GS Advisory Company for high school football players can find us at www.gesadvisory.com. And they can go there. You can actually contact us directly through the website for people that would have an interest in joining our program and realizing young people's dreams of playing college football.
Excellent. Well, do you have a favorite quote or any parting bit of wisdom or a story you'd like to leave us with?
Those who stay will be champions. And so that's my favorite story of all time, coming out of the 1969 season, which actually began in winter conditioning after my dad took the job. And they had started with probably 125, 130 some players on the roster. By the time they got through spring football, they had whittled that down to about 55 leading up to the 1969 season. And it was at that time that my dad purchased a sign for $30, which back in 69 was very expensive. And the sign said, "Those who stay will be champions," and that became the calling card of Michigan football. And I can tell you that that quote is utilized even today in 2017. It still resides in the building right before the players go out for practice. The sign is still there. So that to me is my favorite quote, my favorite story.
That is great parting wisdom. I appreciate that. I actually have a rubber wristband with that on it. This is "Those who stay will be champions." So
outstanding, Jamie.
Yeah.
Very well done. Yep.
Well, we appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and thanks so much for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Whether you are a Michigan football fan or not, you can find value in the insights and stories that Shemy Schembechler shared today. Remember that you can also get a free audiobook download of Bo's Lasting Lessons by going to the website audibletrial.com/Success is a Choice podcast. Thanks again for listening to the show today, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?